Hey guys, how's it going? So I hope you're having a good day today, and I hope all is going well with you. So for today's video, we're going to do another radio story. And for today's radio story, we're going to talk about family radio and the fallout from the 2011 end of the world predictions, which of course didn't come true. Surprise, surprise. So to get started with the story, I'm going to wind back the clock just a bit, just to give you a tiny background, and I'll just kind of breeze through it, and then we'll get to the meat of the story. So, family radio was founded in the 1950s by Harold Camping and Richard Palmquist. And it was a gathering of a couple of Camping and a few other individuals from a couple of other churches to form a Christian radio station. Harold Camping was, I believe he was Christian Reformed. And then there were a couple of other people that I think were Baptist, were mainline Baptist. And then I think another one was a conservative Presbyterian. And anyway, they formed a radio station in San Francisco on 97.3 FM, which had the call letters KEAR, or KEAR, I guess is you could call it that. And then as time went on, this family radio started to expand. And they had purchased a few radio stations around the country. They eventually purchased some AM stations, but they started and purchased two very high-power FM stations in a few very large markets. So they already had 97.3 in San Francisco. They started WFSI 107.9 in Baltimore. They purchased what became WKDN in Philadelphia, which was on 106.9. And they started leasing time on 94.7 in New York City. And they eventually purchased the station, I believe, in the mid-60s. And the network slowly started to expand. And the donations and everything was going fairly swimmingly throughout the 70s and throughout the 80s. And then into the 90s, things started to get interesting. Harold Camping, well, let me back up a little bit. In the late 1980s, family radio started taking some controversial stances on things. And this is kind of where I think some of this end of the world stuff started. Okay, in the late 1980s, Harold Camping proclaimed that churches had become apostate. Now, family radio used to encourage people to go to church and to attend Sunday church services. But by, I believe it was 1988 or 1989, he declared the church age was over. And the churches had become apostate, all the Christian denominations. And that you shouldn't go to church anymore because it's apostate, and that this is sort of the end of the church age, and this is setting the stage for when Jesus is going to come back. Then fast forward a few years, Camping wrote a book called 1994 ? And it predicted that Jesus was going to come back in 1994. And there was a documentary, I think Christopher Hitchens did it, which was likely about religion. And he talked to, he had interviewed Camping, actually. And Camping had said, well, I don't know what I'm going to do if the world doesn't end. But with his book, 1994 ? He left open the possibility that the world may not end. So it was kind of an open question. And then I believe there was another end of the world prediction after that, although again, that may have been a half-hearted kind of one. Well, let's fast forward to the late 2000s, very early 2010s, but probably late 2000s. Camping proclaimed that the world was definitely going to end, and it was going to end May 21st, 2011, and that people needed to get ready and then they needed to repent. And on his program, Open Forum, which had aired from the very early days of family radio up until Camping's retirement after the 2011 prediction, a lot of people had called into Open Forum, and had said, are you sure about this? Are you sure this is going to happen? And Camping, of course, in his... I can't really do an impression of his voice, but I'm going to try. In his own voice said, this is absolutely true. The world is going to end. It's guaranteed. It's, mathematically speaking, if you look at the Bible, it's going to, tell you this. Well, a lot of other Christian groups and Christian clergy, pastors, and what have you, of course, condemn this and assured people that this was not going to, happen on this very date, and said that, that when the second coming comes, it's going to be like a thief in the night. Now, Camping kept proclaiming that the end of the world was for sure. And around the country, he had purchased a ton of billboard signs in markets where family radio broadcast in. I mean, I remember driving through Toledo, Ohio, and I saw one. And it says that it showed a person on their knees saying, like, you need to cry out to God now because the world's going to end. And I think, of course, Toledo, Ohio's family radio affiliate is 90.3 WOTL. And all the billboards around the country, it had the local family radio affiliate on there. Well, the highly anticipated day came, and it went, and nothing happened. And there are a lot of people who actually believed this was going to happen, and they had sold their homes and all their possessions and everything like that. And of course, nothing happened. And that night on his show, Open Forum, Camping admitted that his prediction may have been just a little off, but he still proclaimed that this was, that the end of the world had already started, that the end days were here, that in fact May 21st was the beginning of the end days, but in about 5 months' time or so, I believe it was October 21st, 2011, that the rapture was definitely going to come, that the saved would be raptured up to heaven and everybody else would face eternal damnation, and that the world was going to burn and explode, so to speak. I mean, not his words, but basically that's what he was saying. Soon after that prediction, Camping retired from public life, and the Open Forum show ended. So now here comes the fallout. Family radio had spent a ton of money on this end of the world prediction, with billboards, with printing propaganda about it and everything. So family radio, which was a fairly financially solid ministry, was all of a sudden in the deep red. And soon afterwards, on their website, they proclaimed that they were going to have to sell some radio stations. I believe one of the messages on the site was, we must sell WFME 94.7 New York, or we're going to have to shutter the ministry. So through about the next year or so, year and a half or so, family radio started preparing plans to sell some of their radio stations. The first to go was, of course, 94.7 WFME in New York City. About a month before the sale was going to go through to Cumulus Broadcasting. Cumulus Broadcasting purchased WFME. They changed the license from non-commercial to commercial in preparation of the move. And on formatchange.com, actually it has the sign-off of WFME. And the one host, Charlie Manu, talked about what was going on and talked about how it took a little longer to get the deal to go through and to get everything ready. And redirected people towards a couple of other radio stations, like for selling WFME. They bought a low-power radio station in Mount Kisco, New York, which is on 106.3. And they had also purchased 950 AM in Philadelphia. Because at this time, 106.9 in Philadelphia was for sale too. So anyway, after kind of a sort of a goodbye, Family Radio signed off on 94.7 and then simulcasted WPLJ for a few days and then stunted. And then they became a country station as Nash FM. They're now a classic hip-hop station. So 106.9 in Philadelphia was sold to Merlin Media. And we're going to talk about Merlin Media in another video. But again, the Family Radio redirected people towards 950, which became the new WKDN. And then 106.9 became News Talk as WWIQ. They actually stunted with a 24-hour around-the-clock Sean Hannity show format. But that didn't last too long, and the station became became a news talk station, which by the way didn't last that long, and it was sold to K-Love, so 106.9 reverted back to a religious format. Now WFSI in Baltimore, which was on 107.9, that was sold to CBS Infinity. And what CBS did was they moved their Spanish language station, El Zol, to 107.9 and launched a news talk on 99.1. And now, this is an interesting situation in Baltimore. At one point, Family Radio owned 3 radio stations, and it had the same stuff on there. Let's see, of course, 107.9, they had sold that, but they had 2 other radio stations. And one was on, if I can remember correctly, one was on 750 AM, which was only a daytimer station, which is a weird placement for that station because you had WSB in Atlanta, which is a 50,000 watt Class A station. And I believe, what is it? I think it's 750's call letters, and I might be wrong about this. I believe is WBMD. So Family Radio was on there. I don't know if it was on there forever, but I think it was on there for a while. And then they were also on 860 AM. I believe it was either 850 or 860, which again is a lower powered AM station. So that left them with 2 low power stations in Baltimore, Maryland. Eventually, they sold one of the AMs to Relevant Radio, which of course is Catholic. So Family Radio took big downgrades in those markets. Then in San Francisco, by this point, they were on 106.9. In San Francisco, Family Radio had owned 106.9 since the late 1970s. That's another story in itself, but they started out on 97.3, then they sold 97.3 and got a more powerful signal on 106.9. They sold 106.9 to CBS Infinity. And CBS had flipped 106.9 to a talk format. In turn, Family Radio, to stay on the air in San Francisco, purchased the legendary KFRC, which KFRC became KEAR, and of course that's on the AM. And I feel kind of stupid here. I'm trying to remember. I believe I think it's 610 KFRC, which is now KEAR. I always get mixed up if it's 810 or 610. Maybe I'm thinking of KGO. Maybe I'm thinking about that, which that's in another market. But anyway, Family Radio took a big downgrade, and they eventually sold a few of their other stations around the country. Now, today, most of their stations are there's a few AM stations, and then a lot of their other stations are either on the non-commercial band or they're low-power FM stations on the commercial band. Now, in the wake of all this, and after all the dust kind of settled, some of camping's programs continued on Family Radio, like reruns of The Open Forum, and another show that aired on Sunday night, which was reruns of like Family Radio religious retreats and stuff like that, like events and everything like that, featuring camping. Well, by the late 2010s, Family Radio started shifting its focus. It had been some years since the controversy of the end of the world predictions, and the president of Family Radio at that time, which, by the way, camping passed away in 2013, so camping was gone by this point. The new president of Family Radio said that we've decided to move forward, and we're going to drop all of Harold Camping's programs, drop the end of the world stuff, and drop some of his controversial teachings. The station started adding some outside ministries and had dropped some of the traditional church hymns for contemporary Christian music. They play some contemporary Christian, some old church hymns. And basically, the president said in his letter that we've repented and we've asked the Lord for forgiveness, and we feel that we've come out of our dark period, and we feel we're ready to move on, which is why we're retiring Harold Camping and retiring some of his controversial teachings. So Family Radio was able to move forward, and I believe today Family Radio, I think, has recovered financially. So, and they've even traded a couple of radio stations since. So Family Radio is still very much on the air and very much still going, but on a smaller scale. Now, will Family Radio be as big as it was? I'm not so sure, but they've managed to pick themselves up and dust themselves off and kind of make a break with the past and kind of shed that. But I have to say, with Harold Camping doing that, what a stupid move. I don't know, and I'm not a doctor, but could it be with age that maybe Camping's mind was starting to wander, or maybe his judgment was clouded somehow, or he looked into something so much that he was convinced something was true? I'm not honestly sure, and we'll never know. But I mean, what a stupid move, and what a stupid thing to do, predicting the end of the world. And if he hadn't done that, who knows, Family Radio's ministry could have expanded. But we'll never know for sure. So Family Radio was able to save itself, but it's completely drifted away from its original founder. So that was just a crazy situation. So what do you guys think? Do you remember this? Did you listen to family radio while this was going on? I'm not religious, but I was tuning into open forum near the end of all this, of so-called Judgment Day. I was tuning in just to see what was going to happen. And of course, I tuned in on the Day of Judgment. I go, oh, how is he going to explain this one? So just curious what you guys think. Well, I'm going to wrap this one up, guys. So I want to thank you so much for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. And as always, guys, have a wonderful rest of your day.